So Murdoch, I guess now just over a month ago, we had a conversation, you, Angelica, and I, about how you could bring the New Words plays to life online. Um, Over and above directing a staged reading, was there a way to make this play come alive on a variety of different platforms? And so I'd like you to just tell us a little bit about that process for you.
Yeah, so the process for finding an online avenue for the script started with me trying to figure out what piece of tech I wanted to use. One of the things I've discovered in working in an online platform is that the medium is the message. So the piece of tech that you use to broadcast is so much a part of the story that it felt really important to know what we were going to try to broadcast on before we even had the rest of it. So we started with this idea of testing out a couple different ways that it might work. And I finally settled on a piece of tech I really liked called CDN, which takes green screen footage and merges it together live. And that's sort of where things grew from, is this idea that we were trying to create a space where it might look like we're in the same space, especially in this like moment where we can't actually be in the same space. So that was really attractive, and that's sort of how it all started. Was this piece of tech called CDN, in which we tried to look like we were together.
Yeah, I guess that's one of the challenges of staging a play that was written to be done live, and then figuring out, for example, how do you handle big group scenes in that moment. Um, I'd be interested to find out sort of what you've observed over the process working with the actors, because those are primarily the students you're engaging with certainly on a daily basis, and how you, in your work with them, and how they, in their work of interpreting a play, have had to adjust and accommodate this platform. And any sort of observations or things you've noticed on that end?
Yeah, so I think the thing that we've learned, myself and the actors together, as we're translating a play that was meant to be done live and in person and together and assembled into a context where we're all apart and online, we've learned a lot of really sort of interesting things. I think that one of the big things I've been learning is about the way in which a camera lens changes the style. Theater actors are used to being quite far back, and so they're acting with their whole body. They're doing things for people like very, very far away from them. Whereas with a camera lens, it's very the reaction is more immediate. Like even this is like a big, the camera's changing the lighting balance because my hands are moving. So we've been trying to find sort of like a hybrid style that will allow us to use the theater training we have, but also make use of the technology that's at our fingertips. And I think like that's in many ways the biggest way the project has shifted is how to take a theater text that is meant to be expressive and sort of non-realistic and translate it for a camera lens, especially when we're so inundated with like the camera lens, that the vlogger is something that's very realistic. It's slice of life. So that's been a big challenge, is just learning how to act and direct in this sort of like hybridized new art form.
And certainly from the rehearsals I've observed online, I'm struck that sometimes there are, as much as there are differences and changes, there's also things that stay the same, like certain core principles of the actor's craft or the director's craft that maybe sometimes might need different terminology, but there are fundamentals still at play that you're able to draw on in this moment. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think that there many things are the same about acting online versus in person. I think that sort of a lot of the same dynamics crop up. Things that, like, one of the biggest things I think has been horizon. When an actor on stage is not connecting to the horizon, we feel it. We feel a disconnect with them. And it's similar when an actor is unable to connect to the horizon. If the horizon's above the camera or if the horizon's in the camera, they need to be connecting to that for us to connect to them. And that's one of the, I think the things I've learned the most is I kind of thought like, well, if they just look in the camera, then we'll get it. But actually it's not true. They actually have to really be knowing like who they're talking to, why they're talking to them. All those basic principles are really, really the same. Yeah, totally.
Now, from the director's point of view, a class that you and your fellow director Angelica had this year was Directing at a Distance, working with Michael Wheeler and Sarah Garten Stanley of Spiderweb Show. And I guess I'd like to hear you talk a little bit about how that class, you know, unwittingly prepared you for this moment.
Yeah, who would have thought in November, Angelica, my cohort, and I took a class with Michael Wheeler and Sarah Garten Stanley of Spiderweb Show, and we were learning about directing at a distance. And who would have known in November that like how much we would need that now. I learned so much about the ways in which I think about theater and the theatrical event, and what is the purpose of the theatrical event. How does it work online? How can we, like, what are the essentials of it? From that class and working with both Sarah and Michael and the tech, and, you know, really asking ourselves like, well, what is theater? Is it like, does it have to be that we're all together? Can we make something that's a theatrical event that doesn't involve a theater? And I think that that's really something that I carried forward into this project, and a major piece of learning is like, what's a compelling story, and how do you tell it online, and how do you tell it with the tech that you have and the aesthetics that you have. Like, so in our show, seeing the green screen is a big part of the show. And when the green screen is activated and becomes the forest or the backyard or any of the locations in the play, and when it's just a green screen, that relationship to the technology is a layer of storytelling that we just wouldn't have if we were on stage. It would be a different layer, but it's something that's really exciting, is like, how are the actors and the characters relating to the technology around them, rather than just pretending it doesn't exist.
A lot of organizations and artists are, you know, either creating content online or providing content online. So even though this project was originally created for a real life context, what is it like to be creating work online in this particular moment?
Given that the global institutions are moving so much of their content online, I think that for me, it's really exciting and also really scary. There are things that I feel lost. You mentioned that article about the forgotten art of assembly, and the response to it. And I think that both of those articles have great points. There are things that are lost, but there are also new things, like there are things that are gained. One of the things that's really exciting is creating work that ostensibly, like, we're all in the same city right now, but I could do this work with people in many different cities, and the carbon footprint would be much less because I wouldn't have to travel, they wouldn't have to travel. There's also a thing about access there's like a point about access that I think that's been made a couple times that I think is really important in the way that many different communities can access online art easier than they can access art that's live. And there's so many reasons for that. But I think that really being given the opportunity to try something, it can be frustrating and scary, but it also can be joyous and wonderful. And I think that you know, it's just it's another tool. It's another way of creating. And really what it does for me is it's stretching my imagination to really ask, like, how do you tell a good story? How do you communicate? How do we connect across distance, across platform, through a camera?
Mm-hmm. Great. Now you spoke, you have been using CDN, this online or digital rehearsal room, to experiment and to rehearse with your actors. And because you mentioned there's a few scenes where there's often two or more people in a scene. And so with that, and with, also the work in Zoom and with green screen, is there a language or a code you've developed among your cast, or sort of things that you're now really good at, or short forms you've developed that, could give us a little bit of insight into the rehearsal room that you're running?
Yeah, so the language that we've had to develop using Zoom, CDN, YouTube, using all of our sort of cross platforms to work and rehearse, has been a huge learning curve. On the first day, it was like, go left, no right, wait, stage left, camera, like, and so we've had to like really try and be very efficient in the way we're communicating. Another thing that I think is really interesting is that video can be presented mirrored or unmirrored. So just even figuring out, okay, who's mirroring their video, who isn't, who's backwards, who's forwards, how do you figure that all out? It takes a great deal of patience. But I think that, we have a system of checks that we do. So everybody checks their costumes, everybody checks their headphones, because they all have to wear headphones. Everybody checks their mics. They go one by one and say their name and then clap so that we can sync the audio with the video. We use CDN to create the stage picture. So when we have two people who are side by side, what we do is we go into CDN, I take the actors into CDN, and they sit and they go, okay, Murdoch, you need to turn and look at your scene partner. And then I look at the composite image and I go, okay, no, you're not quite looking at her. Can you turn a little bit more? Turn a little bit more. Oh, you've gone too far. And so there's a language in terms of the eye line that we're trying to capture. When you have two people who aren't actually in the same room, it's very hard to find each other's eyes, especially when you can't look at the camera and you have to look at your scene partner. So we've come up with a couple tricks in terms of how to set that up. Often what we do is we'll take the shot, have the actors show the ground and the wall, put their hand on the ground at the back of the wall, have the two of them overlap their hands, and then slowly move the shot, the camera angle up so that it pans to the correct position. So that way they're in scale. So that's another big thing we have to watch for, is like, oh no, Murdoch, you're way bigger than your scene partner. Your camera needs to come closer or farther. The camera angles really make a big difference. Eye line. These are like just some of the things that we've had to like learn how to watch for when creating the stage picture. And yeah, the technology has been frustrating at times because you're like, oh wait, can you, but also it's been really amazing to see the kind of things that people dream up, and watching all the tutorials online about people going like, here's this cool thing you can do with Zoom, or like 10 tips to make your Zoom cocktail party work. Like we learned about breakout rooms like that, and that's how we record. So so I think that there's a whole new language that we're developing, and that's a little bit of it.
Nice. Now, not only are you dealing with all the challenges you've described of the tag, but you've thrown in an extra layer, which is puppets. And so I'm wondering if you could just talk a bit about your decision to incorporate puppetry into this online presentation, because that wasn't part of your pre-COVID-19 concept. And yeah, just any insight you want to share about adding that into the mix.
So the original production of the New Words Festival show did not include puppets, but I decided to include them for the online iteration because of a number of reasons. The first being that shortly after I decided I was really interested in exploring what CDN had to offer and what YouTube had to offer, I started feeling that the bounds of real-time camera and this aesthetic of cameras and lenses, that there's a kind of realism that a lens demands. And I wanted to push that relationship as much as possible. So I started thinking about like what the original production was doing, and in its design. And the original production had a sort of like proscenium arch that was like, we're doing theater. And in many ways, we were trying to underline this idea of a theatrical experience. So we moved online. I was like, okay, how do you do that online? So the puppets came out of this idea I had around trying to underscore not only the theatrical experience, but also the relationship between mothers and daughters. And when you see someone using because our puppets are about a foot, maybe a little bit under, depending on the age of the puppet. It depends on the scale. We started seeing that like having an actor or a character take care of something much smaller than them, you got this sort of doubling of like mother to daughter. And I found that such a beautiful way to express the underlying themes of the play was to use puppetry, and to use it also as a theatrical tool and say like, this is a performance event.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. Now, just one last question. You spoke about the actors sort of having to embrace this learning curve of you're a technician and an actor. And now as an actor, you're also, there's a puppet to manipulate. Can you speak to, or can you talk about it, what the actor's experience has been like also dealing with the puppet in this circumstance?
Yeah, I think that the actor's experience of the puppets has shifted pretty radically over the time that we've been together. It's also partially because the way that we use the puppets has shifted pretty radically. When I had envisioned the original online production, I was like, okay, I know I want to use puppets. I think I want to use them like this, which is to say that like we would never see the actor, we would only ever see the puppet. And then so we spent our first week of rehearsal doing table work. The next week we spent just working on puppetry and the beats of the puppetry and really breaking them down and going, okay, then she looks, beat, down, up, like trying to really isolate the expressiveness of the puppetry. And then after we saw the first run through, there was this sort of layer that was trying to break through around the theatrical event and the relationship of performer to character to puppet to so I spent some time thinking about it, and I went like, okay, now we want to see the actor inside of the shot. So then the next week was spent like trying to understand the relationship between the performer and the object. And in a way, I'm actually really glad that that's how the steps went, because in the grand scheme of things, it was simpler to go, okay, so now it's just the puppetry is all we're working on right now. Now we're working on the relationship. Now we're, and then we get bigger and bigger and bigger. Mm-hmm. So I'm glad that it panned out that way. I also think that it created a really interesting dynamic between the actor and the puppet, because initially that was the only tool of expression. So it gave them a focus point. So when I brought them back into the shot, they were expressing through the puppet and through themselves. And the relationship between those two modes of expression, I think is something that's really unique about the work.
Now, my super last question. Obviously, with very little notice, we were all sent home. And a week before you were to head in rehearsals, you were sent home. So there was virtually no time collectively where we could be together to figure out a plan. So I guess, can you talk about how everyone got what they needed? Who built what? Where did the green screens come from? Et cetera, et cetera.
We had very little time or very little notice when everything sort of, when the shelter in place orders came down. It was about a week before our rehearsals were meant to start, that we actually had to stop for 2 weeks, put everything on pause because we weren't sure what was going to happen. So the way that the actors received everything is that we knew about halfway into our pause, our 2 week pause, that we wouldn't be coming back anytime soon. So that was when the sort of like challenge was issued to see if we could figure out how to make this all work online. And I spent some time alone thinking about it. And then I called my designers and was like, hey, does this interest you? And I was really lucky. Mariev was actually meant to do a puppetry residency this summer. So she was like, she has experience with puppets and was really excited about the idea. So she built 4 of the puppets. She built Sneezy, Sleepy, Grumpy, and Happy. And then I built the 2 younger characters' puppets, so Bashful and Dopey. Mariev also hand illustrated some backdrops for us to look like storybook illustrations. They're really beautiful. And when we knew that we would be using green screens, you, Matyash, you
Okay.
went to the dollar store, I think, and on your bike delivered not only the green screens but the puppets and some of the and the props. And it was, you know, it's been really interesting. Like, I build the puppet in my basement, I like put it on my porch. You rock up with your bike, you grab them off my porch, you end up like they went to, I think they went to Sadie, and then from there all the actors would like come, she'd put one on the porch, go back, they'd come and get it. Like it's been a whole operation. And I'm so lucky to be surrounded by so many people who were like game. And yeah, it's really been quite wild thinking about you know, just on Sunday I built another puppet, the Snow White puppet, because we realized we needed her. And so she was 24 hours, she was built and shipped off. And Was came in, her family drove her in, and she got she got her puppet and her green screen. And it's just, you know, it's been kind of a wild ride, but it's been kind of amazing too.
Great. Well, thank you, Murdoch.